The heavyweight division in the mid to late 2000s was an interesting one. With Lennox Lewis retired, it was generally understood that the Europeans were slowly taken over, with the Klitschko's at the top. However, there were several other title holders who came and went during that era, but were never really able to make much of an impact. One of those title holders was the former two-time WBA heavyweight champion Nikolai Valuev from Russia. Nordic Warrior here, hope you guys are all doing well. Welcome back to my retrospective boxing series. So today we're going to be looking at the career of Nikolai Valuev. Valuev was at one time listed at 7'2", making him, if I'm not mistaken, the tallest heavyweight champion of all time. He was considered for most of his career to be little more than a gimmick, a circus act more so than a genuine heavyweight champion. Even when he became champion, he was never really that highly regarded. However, despite his limitations, he actually had a pretty respectable record. So Valoev turned professional in 1993 in the heavyweight division. He was a late starter to boxing, supposedly turning to the sport at 20 years old, and didn't have much of an amateur background. In the early part of his career, he travelled across Europe taking on mostly journeymen, and became Russian heavyweight champion, and shortly after he travelled over to Prague to take on the 1-0 German fighter Andreas Seidon. In one of the most bizarre fights you will ever see, Valoev was originally awarded a premature stoppage in the third round. However, the crowd reacted badly to it, throwing things at the referee demanding the fight continue. Both Valoev and Seidon agreed to continue the fight, and it went all 8 rounds, with Valoev winning by decision. However, due to the referee leaving the ring before the end, the commission overturned the decision, making the fight a no contest. Over the next few years, he continued fighting on obscure cards across Europe. In 2002, he travelled over to South Korea and took on the Ukrainian prospect Taras Bykendo for the Pan-Asian Boxing Association heavyweight title, winning by a wide unanimous decision. In 2003, he travelled over to Germany and decided to base his career there, and over there he started to grow his profile. During that time, he took on some well-known heavyweight journeymen such as Dickie Ryan, Bob Mirovich, Otis Tisdale, and several others. The first major test of his career came against the fringe contender, Marcelo Fabian Dominguez, winning by a wide unanimous decision. He then took on the undefeated Richard Bango for the WBA Intercontinental Heavyweight title, winning by 6th round stoppage. He then took on Pablo Vidos later that year, stopping him in the 9th round. For his next title defence, he took on the undefeated contender Gerald Nobles, who was disqualified in the 4th round for low blows. He then took on Natalia Levin, stopping him in the 3rd round. He then took on the well-known fringe contender Clifford Etienne, stopping him in the 3rd round. For the final defence of his WBA Intercontinental title, he had a WBA World title eliminator against the American fringe contender Larry Donald. The fight was competitive throughout, with Donald landing the cleaner, more effective punches, and Valoev, while having his moments, struggling to really gain control of the fight. Most observers felt that Donald had clearly done enough to win the fight. However, in a highly controversial decision, Valoev was awarded a majority decision victory. After beating Donald, Valoev got his first shot at a world title, taking on the WBA champion John Ruiz in Germany. The fight was fairly competitive early on, but for the most part Valoev was in control with his long-range boxing, and he outlanded Ruiz down the stretch, winning by a close but clear majority decision, becoming world champion for the first time. For his first title defence, he had a relatively soft defence, taking on the American fringe contender Owen Beck, stopping him in the 3rd round after a dominant performance. He then travelled over to America to take on Monty Barrett. In what was a great fight, Barrett came out swinging for the fences in the 1st round, looking to knock Valoev out early. However, his punches basically bounced off Valoev's chin, doing little to no damage. Valoev's size and strength proved to be too much for Barrett. Valoev won the fight by an 11th round stoppage after a dominant performance. The fight was televised by HBO Boxing, who expressed their interest in a potential unification with Vladimir Klitschko, though the fight never materialised. After beating Barrett, he travelled over to Switzerland to take on the American fringe contender Jamil McCline. McCline was pulled out after round 3 with a knee injury. He then returned to Germany, taking on the undefeated contender Ruslan Chagaev from Uzbekistan. Despite his massive size advantage, Valoev was outboxed and outwitted by Chagaev, who used his superior speed and skills to get the better of the much bigger, much slower Valoev over 12 rounds. Valoev had his moments, and his long-range boxing and reach advantage gave Chagaev some issues, but for the most part Chagaev was in control, winning the fight by majority decision, giving Valoev the first loss of his career. Later that year, Valoev made a comeback, taking on the undefeated Canadian contender Jean-Francois Bergeron in Germany, winning by a wide unanimous decision. He then took on the former WBO heavyweight champion Sergei Liakovic, winning by a wide unanimous decision in a dominant performance, in a WBA title eliminator. With Chagaev being stripped of the WBA title, Valoev got a shot at the vacant title once again against his former opponent John Ruiz in a rematch, once again in Germany. This time was even more one-sided. Valoev outboxed the former champion Ruiz in most of the rounds, winning by a clear unanimous decision. Interestingly, the fight was originally announced as a split decision. However, due to an error in one of the scorecards, it was overturned to a unanimous decision. Later that year, for his first title defense, Valoev travelled back over to Switzerland, taking on the 46-year-old heavyweight boxing legend Evander Holyfield. The fight naturally received a lot of criticism due to Holyfield's age and inactivity. It had been years since he was genuinely considered a serious heavyweight contender, and due to this many fans considered the fight a cherry pick. However, in one of the most bizarre fights you will ever see, Valoev basically did nothing. I'm not kidding, he stood there right in front of Holyfield for the full 12 rounds, barely moved, barely threw any punches, and seemingly made no effort to win the fight, standing there like a statue, while Holyfield moved around, threw the occasional pot shot and flurry of punches, and appeared to win most of the rounds clearly. Interestingly, the Showtime Sports commentators insinuated throughout the fight that it may have been fixed, because Valoev was never hurt or tired one time during the fight, and every time he did throw punches, he was able to land since Evander's reflexes and timing seemed to be shot. Nonetheless, the fight went 12 rounds, and to make it even more bizarre, in a pretty shocking decision, Valoev was awarded a majority decision victory, which baffled boxing fans. After beating Holyfield, Valoev travelled back over to Germany and the following year had the final fight of his career, defending his title against the popular former unified cruiserweight champion David Haye. In what was a pretty boring and lackluster fight, David Haye basically ran away all night, throwing the occasional big punch and looking to spoil his way to victory from the outside, taking no chances and looking for one shot at a time. Valoev followed him around and threw more punches, and tried to apply pressure. Officially, David Haye, despite his negativity, won the fight by a very close majority decision. Valoev was also badly hurt in the 12th round from a left hook, and it was probably the only time in his career where he was ever seriously hurt from a punch. I personally had Valoev winning the fight, because despite his lack of punches landed, he was the defending champion and he was the only guy trying to make the fight. His volume and work rate should have gotten him the win in my personal opinion, since the negative performance from Haye just wasn't enough to legitimately win the title. Interestingly, the Sky Sports commentators, who were rooting for Haye, agreed with me. They had Valoev winning the fight. Nonetheless, Haye won the fight officially, with Valoev retiring shortly after. So how good was Nikolai Valuev? How would he have done in today's era, or any era besides his own? Let's talk about it. In my personal opinion, Valoev was an overachiever. He was a fighter who was tremendously limited, but at the same time he was able to achieve a lot due to his size, strength and his persistence. One attribute that would have always served him well as far as I'm concerned is his chin. He was an incredibly tough man, and as far as I'm aware he was never knocked down in his career. He also had pretty good stamina for such a big man. I never once saw him gas in a fight, though his volume was usually very low. He was very slow and easy to hit, however, and was often outboxed by smaller men. He also seemed to lack a boxing IQ, not really understanding how to make the most out of his size and his reach, and how to utilise those advantages. One thing I like about Valoev is that despite his size and weight, he actually didn't misuse those attributes. Unlike a lot of big heavyweights, he would hardly ever clinch, and wasn't one to rely on illegal tactics much, such as leaning on the back of his opponents and headlocking his opponents. He usually preferred to rely on long-range boxing and fought fairly, cleanly and within the rules. And it's rare that you see that from a heavyweight of his size following the rules of the sport, and I like that. I respect that about him. He was also a very patient fighter, sometimes a little too patient like in the Holyfield fight, though let's be honest, he didn't want to hurt the old man. That's why he basically let him win. So in short, I think Valoev was a good fighter with some decent attributes, but compared to some of the all-time great heavyweights, he just didn't have the skill or the athleticism to compete with them. In today's era, I could see him having some success, but I can't see him being a long-time champion or anything like that. Thanks for watching, guys. I really enjoyed looking into the career of Nikolai Valuev. Stay tuned for more retrospective boxing videos. I have a lot of them coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.